You're listening to Ask When, the podcast. Folks from all walks of life talk about their daily hustle and bustle, living and celebrating life, sharing tips on becoming champions, especially for those who are muscling mental and physical disabilities. Ask When, the podcast, with your host who has mustered over 30 years living with cerebral palsy and going strong. Author and cerebral palsy advocate, Wynn Charles. Ask When, the podcast starts right now.
Welcome to Ask When, everyone. Now, if you guys hear me have a fangirl moment, I am interviewing one of my podcasting heroes. Unfortunately, we haven't met in person yet. Yet being the operative word. One of these days we will. But I have Mr. Chris Holifield with me. And the thing I love about his podcast, he actually has two podcasts, one about marijuana, and which is not child friendly, but the other one is, and he takes a local perspective on the community members of Utah. And he does it in person with his wife, Krissie. And so I'm going to let the one half of I Am Result take it away, because I only have one half with me today. But if you guys go subscribe to I Am So you'll hear the other half chime in. So Mr. Chris, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Well, hey, thanks so much for letting me come on your show, Wynn. And gosh, that's a heck of an introduction. Yeah, it's so like you're saying, I Am Salt Lake. I actually do it with my wife, Krissie. I started the podcast by myself, so it's fun to bring her into the show. And then, like you were saying, Wynn, it'd be great to bring her on your podcast here. I'm sure she would love to do it. And so I do you want me to kind of tell you how the show started, or what are you looking?
Yes,
What's that?
would like you to tell my audience, because I don't even think I know this origin story. I just stumbled across it because I'm interested in traveling, and I'm interested in people outside Colorado. I just stumbled across it in my podcast player. I think it was iTunes at the time on my cell phone, and I said, "Ooh, I Am Salt Lake, yellow logo. Let's listen." And then you guys got me hooked. So I don't even know the origin story, you guys, of how I Am Salt Lake got started.
Sure. No, well, let's go back. So the podcast, the first, I started getting interested in podcasts back in about 2010. So about 10 years ago now. And it was some friends of mine. They were doing a podcast, and it just seemed like a lot of fun. I was really interested in talk radio. I love talk radio. I love that communication. I love the idea of listening to conversations. So I got introduced to podcasts, and I instantly knew that I wanted to do a podcast, but I didn't know what to do a podcast about. I didn't really know a whole lot of people that did a podcast. I knew one other person. They did a podcast about comic books. So it's kind of like, well, okay, I get the idea, and I was listening to podcasts. Eventually, I was at a downtown farmer's market. I'm sure you have farmer's markets in your town there,
yeah.
with the food vendors and food trucks and all of that. And I was like, why don't I interview these people in my local community here in Salt Lake City, find out their story? Because a lot of times we don't know the stories of everyday people in your city. So why not make a podcast of it? Right? And at that time, I didn't really know a whole lot about podcasting. So I didn't even know a whole lot about equipment. And so I had to do a lot of research, and I just started kind of piecing equipment together, started recording podcasts, and this summer will be 8 years of doing the podcast. I release an episode every week. When I started, I used to do 2 a week, but now I just do 1 a week. And we just have a lot of fun. I do it with my wife, and I couldn't ask for a better co-host, and she makes it a lot of fun. I tend to be the serious one. She tends to be the comedian one, so we make a great pair there.
And give you a plug. You did a great episode, and I think people should go listen to it, about COVID-19 and someone who had COVID-19. And I think you guys did a great job on that one. And that was at the beginning of this. And because I follow you on the Facebook, I was at the beginning, like the rest of us were. I was curious as to see what COVID-19 was actually like. And so when you said I did an episode, I immediately went click, podcast, play.
Yeah, and that conversation kind of fell in my lap. About 10 minutes before I did the interview, the person's friend sent me a message on Facebook. So I was very unprepared for that. And it was just kind of one of those things where it was like, nobody knew what the coronavirus was. Nobody knew, anything about it. And so the opportunity, he was like the number 6 person in the state of Utah to get tested, the 6th person. That's crazy.
That's nuts. And when you guys will hear this, you have to go back and listen to this episode, because I doubt that we'll be out of this they say by August, but I doubt it. So if you want to go hear a first-hand account, go listen to that one. And yes, go listen to all the other ones. All the other ones are fabulous. But since we're sitting in time, I might as well plug the latest and greatest one of the first-hand account. And so, Chris, what is your favorite book, and what is the title?
My favorite book, actually, is Cash by Johnny Cash. It's the autobiography of Johnny Cash. Maybe you've read it. Not sure. It's a great book.
I haven't. And I am a huge music lover. I'll get to why in a minute. But I haven't. And now I have to go pick up Cash by Johnny Cash, because I didn't even know he had autobiography. No.
Yeah, well, so he's one of my favorite musicians, Johnny Cash, and the book is just great because he kind of journals his life of kind of going from this, poor house, poor family, and and then he kind of made something of himself, and it's kind of cool. So he's got a heck of a story, and then his drug addictions to pain pills and stuff like that. So it's a lot of motivation, inspiration, and it's just a good story.
And if your best friend had to write a book about you, what would the title be?
Oh, probably My Crazy Life.
Crazy life. Your crazy life. And yeah, your crazy life is getting crazier by the minute.
If you had 6 hours to talk to me, when I could tell you some of the stories of my life and some of the things I've done, and I'll tell you what, it's pretty crazy.
Yep. And didn't you meet your wife, Krissie, because of the podcast? Do you want to hear that story too?
Yeah.
I know that story from a little buddy. I won't admit that story who said that, Dave Jackson. There we go. The little buddy's out. But you met your wife because of the podcast, didn't you?
Yeah. That's it. Well, it's a fun story because it's not an everyday story. It's not how most people get connected. So my wife Krissie, who co-hosts the podcast with me, she was podcasting. She was doing another podcast. This is before I even met her. She was doing another podcast with a friend, and she was doing stand-up comedy here in Salt Lake City. And so she was on my radar. I was like, well, maybe I should bring her on I Am Salt Lake, and maybe I should interview her, right?
Oh boy.
But at the same time, when you like somebody, when you think somebody's cute, you're nervous around them. You don't want to talk to them, right? It's always harder because when you introduce this podcast, you fangirl a little bit, right? You get a little nervous. So anyway, to make a long story short, we both knew of each other, so we matched up on Tinder. And so, I mean, Tinder put us together, but if it wasn't for the podcast, then we wouldn't have even known of each other and probably even matched on Tinder. So it's because I was doing I Am Salt Lake for 3 years prior to starting to date Krissie.
Yes.
So for 3 years I was just doing the show solo, and then I brought her in after about 6 months of dating her.
Yes. Yes. And so To Love via podcast. There you go, you guys. To Love via podcast. And so, Chris, what is your morning routine?
Well, morning routine pre being stuck at home, or like before all of this stuck at home.
You can do
business?
Both. You can do both. I know
yes.
Stuck at home is a little bit difficult.
Yeah, well, life is so different, being at home here, because we have 3 kids at the house here, and then my wife's working from home as well, and so it's a lot crazier now. But before when life was a little more normal, I used to get up every morning at 4:30 in the morning, go hit the gym up from about 5 a.m. to 6:30ish, be home almost 6:45, and then I would usually listen to like a positive podcast. So I'd be at the gym for about an hour and a half, get my cardio and my workout in, right? Get my heart pumping for the day. And I would do this every day. I'd go 6-7 times a week. And then I come home, spend about another hour or so. And this is before the kids are even up. This is before anybody's really moving around, because everybody in my house are such late starters. Nobody gets up early here except me. And so I've just spent most of my morning kind of reading more positive things and writing them in a gratitude journal and doing more of that type of thing, versus I used to read the newspaper, and I used to, just hop on Facebook first thing in the morning. But I have to really do that exercising and gratitude journal and listening to a positive podcast or reading a positive book for the first couple hours of the morning.
Now, because the news is so depressing. Golly, the news is so depressing. No, and I have friends out in Salt Lake, including you, and it's like between Salt Lake and Colorado, I don't know what to think. I mean, these little mountain towns are getting demolished by big coronavirus. But geez, at least we're standing in the right place, and I'm trying to stand in the right place. I'm trying not to be as vocal as I would like to be, but I'm also standing up for people with disabilities. So, Chris, as we wrap this interview up, do you have any questions for me? I know you do.
Questions to ask you, or
questions to ask me?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm kind of curious. How long have you been doing this podcast?
I have been doing this podcast for 5 years, almost 6 years. Recorded over 1,300 episodes and aiming for 2,000 episodes. And yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah, I knew you've been doing it for a while. I was just curious how long you've been doing it for. I think my biggest question, I'm curious what your favorite flavor of ice cream is.
Oh, my favorite when I do eat it, I don't eat sugar necessarily. My favorite flavor of ice cream is, I would say, a good chocolate fudge.
Oh, there
I
we
like
go.
a good chocolate fudge. And I'll take anything chocolate. People know that my weakness people know my weakness is chocolate peanut butter cups and anything with caramel. And it's like, oh my goodness, give the person who doesn't eat sugar primarily, give her caramel, give her chocolate. I'm done for because I'll, I'll sit there and eat the whole bag of chocolate if you let me. And then I'll feel better. But I'm like, oh, the chocolate peanut butter cups, please. So that's why I say anything having to do with chocolate or anything having to do with caramel is my favorite ice cream flavor.
I love it. I could get in on a bowl of that stuff as well. Very cool.
Yes,
No, I'm just grateful that you invited me on your
yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
And
Go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say. I mean, I love that you're podcasting. I love that you're getting these awesome messages out there, and you have some really great episodes. I mean,
Well,
go back and listen. I'm going to tell the listeners, if you're listening right now, go back and listen to some of those back episodes, because I'm sure there's got to be one or two that people haven't listened to,
yeah,
right?
yes, there's got to be one or two. And Chris, where can people find you? And Krissie, thank you very much. Where can people find you guys?
Yeah, it's just iamsaltlake.com. And that way you can go find out the podcast. It's got all the contact information. And I am Salt Lake really on any social media as well.
And I just wanted to tell you guys. Now, this has to do with podcasting and Chris's other podcast, which we did not touch on because it's so new and because it's not family friendly, although it is family friendly to those of us who are in states with marijuana. Thank you very much. And in the weeds. And Chris has another podcast called In the Weeds and all about the cannabis industry in Utah. And so if you want to go listen to In the Weeds by Chris Holifield, please be my guest. Just don't listen around kids. And although I am so like it's pretty much family friendly. And so Chris, if you had one piece of advice for new podcasters, do they do a local podcast or stay away from it? Or what's been your advice? Because you started out local and I started out national. Now looking back on it, I wish I took your lead, and I'm being nice and being honest, but I think taking the local niche is better than taking the national niche.
No, absolutely, because every time you walk out your door or leave your door, leave your home, your audience is there, right? Every time I leave my house, I have the opportunity to tell somebody about my podcast. Now, you could tell people about your podcast too, but chances are they're going to be more interested to listen to a podcast about their city because they're like, well, I live here, so I want to find out about it.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
no, I love it. Plus, I like to interview people in person. Like, this is fun, but it's fun to look at people, you know, across the table.
Yes.
And
You guys have a great dynamic there. And the next time I beat it out to Salt Lake, which I don't know when, but I'm hoping soon. And I'll hit you guys up, and then you guys have to show me around Salt Lake, because the last time I was out there, it was when the 2002 Olympics happened. I happened to be a torchbearer for the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake, and so I didn't know anyone. I did not know where. I barely knew where Salt Lake was, but now I do. So the next time I beat it out there. And here's another piece of advice for you guys who are local to Utah and local to Carlisle. Utah actually has a Utah podcasting summit, believe it or not. And so there's another piece of advice. You can learn how to podcast with Chris and Dave and everyone. And I know Dave Jackson is going to be out there. And the last thing I wanted to tell you guys is Google finally got in the act of podcasting after many, many months of playing with them. And Spotify actually got in the act. Spotify will actually now notify you of the shows that you follow. Let's say you follow In the Weeds and Ask When, or I Am Salt Lake, or In the Weeds, or Ask When. Just put your notifications on in Spotify, and Spotify will actually notify you now, which I find very fascinating, which is before Spotify was a little bit of a beast to deal with.
I didn't know that. I'll have to check that out.
You didn't know. See, I taught you something, Chris, that I didn't find out until last night. So I'm going to have to tell Chris this one, because I didn't know, because Apple Podcast, and I almost called it iTunes. Apple Podcast is such the elephant in the room now that all the rest of the competitors have to keep up. But wherever you guys listen to Ask When, please go subscribe to I Am Salt Lake. Even if you're not local to Salt Lake, they give a wealth of information. And please go subscribe to the other one, In the Weeds, into marijuana. And I enjoyed Chris today tremendously, and I hope you guys did too. And I'll catch you guys later. Bye, you guys. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Win.
You just listened to Ask Win, the podcast. To become a guest in the show, visit our website at askwin.weebly.com or call 816-591-3399. Just look for Danielle. Connect with Win on Twitter at WinKellyCharles and like our Facebook page at Butterflies of Wisdom. You can also purchase Win's book through Amazon.com or get a copy of the audiobook through Audible. Ask Win, the podcast.